Hello everyone. I feel very awkward all the time when I get introduced because I get connected with smashing, smashing. I tend to be just a nice person in general, and the work I do is, well, sometimes it is smashing, sometimes it's not. Now what's important for me today, because we don't have a lot of time, is to know how many of you feel very comfortable with very horrible code. Not many. That's not many. Who feels very comfortable with CSS in general? All right. Who feels very comfortable with JavaScript? All right. Who doesn't like CSS, who would love to have a more general design talk instead? Oh, just a few people. I have to jump slides now. That's cool. We'll figure out what I'm going to do. I have no idea what I'm going to do. This is going to be fun. Now, first of all, this talk is about some of the dirty tricks that you might or might not know. Some of the things are from the work I did, some of the things are from colleagues that I worked with. And I have to warn you at this point, the things you're going to see today, you're not going to unsee, ever. They are bad, they are horrible, they're dirty like hell, and you will not like most of them, but you might be able to use them once in a while. So let's get right into it. Are you ready? Yeah, say like 5 people in the first row. Or, all right, whatever. OK, that's fine. So the way we're going to do it is I'm going to pose challenges, and I'm going to expect you to give me answers on how we're going to solve it. Now, the best solutions come when you have a little amount of time, right? So let's imagine you have a really difficult problem to solve, and you have a client telling you that you have to solve it by yesterday, so you don't have a lot of time to experiment. So let's see how you're going to deal with it. So here's the problem. You might end up at some point on your Swedish website having lots of broken images. Now, normally the behavior that browsers have when images cannot be displayed is pretty bad. Well, it looks like this, right? This is not very beautiful. Like, when it comes to user experience, this is just not good, right? Maybe we can make it better. But the question is now, is there any way to actually improve it? Is there any way to improve the experience by changing the styling only if images are broken with CSS alone? Yes? Yes? How would you do it?
I can use the pseudo element of the image, and it's supported by some browsers, not for every one of them.
Sibling element. Or pseudo element, yes. Exactly. This is very interesting because if you think about the behavior that browsers have, well, the image element, as we all know and love, is a replaced element. This is an element whose appearance and dimensions are defined by an external resource. Pseudo elements typically shouldn't work with it. So if you're trying to style a pseudo element, it shouldn't work normally unless the image cannot be displayed. So you can improve your experience with broken images by actually styling the pseudo elements, because if, like after or before, because if the image cannot be displayed, then this is going to be displayed, right? So we can actually really improve the way broken images look like. With a little bit of CSS. There is nothing fancy about it. Just use before pseudo element or after pseudo element to do whatever you want to do. Now, this is not very difficult. And it's actually kind of supported pretty well, except, who doesn't support it? So we're kind of getting used to it. But you can get it done today. It's not a big deal. All right, here's a different one. Is there any way to isolate expensive components? Now, we know lazy loading, right? We tend to use JavaScript in order to load images or load JavaScript, expensive JavaScript later, so they don't blocking rendering, right? Can we do it with CSS alone? Is there any way to isolate expensive components similar to lazy loading and paint important component faster but using CSS alone? Now, at this point, you might be asking, what the hell is going on? Why would you use CSS for it? I mean, what's wrong about JavaScript? Well, there is nothing wrong with JavaScript. There is only one little thing. It's not that I don't like JavaScript. I just don't particularly like it, right? If we can avoid things with CSS alone instead of using JavaScript, it's better to do it this way because it's a bit more resilient, right? So is there a way of doing something like this? Anybody? A few nods. Who wants to leave at this point? That's OK. Oh, not many people. That's OK. Well, there is a way of doing this, actually. And we can use the contain property, which is actually coming up now. And it's also available in Chrome already. So if you look in the spec, it says, well, it's a primitive for isolating style, layout, and paint. It's a way of us to declare some components, be it widgets or third-party components or social buttons or whatever, telling the browser they're not so important. You can actually postpone not only loading them, but also painting them, calculating the layout and everything, right? And the way it works is, well, you can imagine it being used in many different scenarios. The only thing we need to define is how we're going to define the module, the contain property for a given module. So we can use constant strict, paint, and layout. And we can use it, for example, to offload third-party widgets, so they will be loaded later. Also things like off-canvas navigation, which doesn't have to be displayed at all at first, right? We can actually offload it and say, well, it has to be painted later. And the same goes for container queries. How many of you heard of container queries? So we have media queries, right? Container queries would allow us to actually define the behavior of a component within its local scope, very much like CSS modules will do in the future, where instead of saying, well, I have a media query and it tells me, if I have a maximum width, max width of, I don't know, 1,000 pixels, do this, right? If I have 1,200 pixels, do this. But it always refers to the global viewport. It's not really helpful. It would be much nicer to say, I'm a component, and if I'm at most 300 pixels, I want to look this way. If I'm at most 500 pixels, I want to look this way. So it doesn't really refer to the viewport, but actually to the width of the element itself, or the height, right? It would be much more comfortable. And this is the reason why I really hate media queries, because actually they force me to go through media, when there is a new feature coming in, for example, it forces me to go through all the media queries and fix things, even if we're, of course, using Sass and less and so on, styles and so on. It still forces me to kind of take care of these if-then requirements. And we can actually avoid it with contain. And currently available only in Chrome, but you can already use it today. It is coming up in other browsers as well. Now, here's another thing. Fluid typography, we like good type, right? We like when things scale up and down. This is what we tend to do in responsive design. But how would we actually do it? Again, if we want to avoid media queries. Now, very often, we might be using calc in combination with VH, VW, Vmin, and Vmax, right? You know of this stuff? VH, VW, all these units. That's great because we can say, well, one VW is 1% of the viewport width. One VH is 1% of the viewport height. Vmin is the minimum of both, and Vmax is the maximum of both, right? So if you say, I'm going to define the font size for my heading being the calc of 16 pixels plus 1 VH or VW, then of course the minimum size will be 16 pixels, and then it's going to grow, right? That's great, but at the same time it means that actually it will grow infinitely. But what if you don't want it to just grow proportionally, you want it to grow according to the scale, right? We do have a nice typographic scale, so we want it to grow this way. Well, it will take some thinking. Have you run into this problem before, maybe? Is it a problem I just invented? This is because you do want to have a nice type that actually scales up beautifully everywhere, not just in proportion, like growing as you normally would, but really according to the scale. Because we can use stuff like this. This is great, right? If you want to have the font typography really growing and scaling up and down, you can use calc in combination with font size. That's great. And you can even achieve things like this, right? Where you have large type looking great, small type looking great. The problem is, however, and it's really fluid, right? It's not like we're defining certain breakpoints, and for every single breakpoint we're changing something. It just grows automatically, almost organically. The problem is, at some point, this might become too small, right? So we need to define something like minimum, which is if you look into the code again, which is what 4VW stands for here. But in general, we want to have a bit more control. Because if we wanted to choose a font size of 16 pixels at a screen resolution of 400 pixels, and then transition nicely to 24 pixels at 800 pixels, we just couldn't do it without a breakpoint. There is just no way. However, there is a little way. We just need to use a little formula. This is a bit crazy, but it works like charm sometimes. Not all the time, but sometimes. So it would take us too much time to actually go through it and explain what exactly is going on. But by combining the calc, the maximum font size, minimum screen size, and maximum screen size, and the difference between them, you can actually define this beautiful transition according to the scale. And it works like charm. And the only way you have to do it is you choose the min font size and the screen sizes, or which the font should scale, and you plug them in the formula, and then it's going to work. And then you end up with this really nice, beautiful, fluid modular scale, which actually grows according to this ratio that you had defined. Not just with every single VH or VW, it just grows the way you want it to grow, right? Which is beautiful. And of course, excellent for responsive design. No media queries needed at all, which is, I think, great. Oh, wow. OK, somebody is really excited about this stuff. OK, so if you want to learn a bit more on how to plug this in, how to use this again, we published an article about this, which you can read. All right. So here is, this is not that dirty, right? Let's go dirty stuff. So what if you want to nest one link inside another? Is it even possible? So let's imagine you have a sidebar. In that sidebar, you have this block, the entire sidebar, which is maybe contains a paragraph, which is a link. It should be linking to some external resource. At the same time, in that paragraph, you might have links which lead to other sites, right? So of course, you can link the entire paragraph, but then the part inside is not going to be, the link inside is not going to be working. Do you know what I mean? So because if we want to have this kind of experience, where we have this block as a link, but these links are links too, they lead to different sites, or different pages at least, right? Now, can you nest a link inside a link in HTML? Well, you can, it's just not going to work, right? Because if you do this, this is what is going to happen. Now, this is the first link we are opening. And then we're opening the second link inside of that link, right? The browser will think that, the developer is stupid, they have no idea what they're doing, so they will actually just close the first link, assuming that you're wrong and you forgot to do it, and then not going to reopen it for the rest of the text. So we end up, after the first link, we're going to end up with the text not being a link anymore, right? Which is kind of a problem. Now, of course, we could say, well, we're going to use a little bit of JavaScript and just, open the link, close the link, close the link, open the link, close the link, and then it's going to work. Yes, or you can do it a bit dirtier, just because you can, right? There is one fantastic property that is highly ignored, neglected, disrespected, which is extremely awesome, which is the object tag. Who likes the object tag? I thought so. Not many people like the object tag. Because if you think about the object tag, what it does is it actually lives on another planet from the browser's perspective. So if you put something inside of the object tag, it almost exists outside of the scope of the DOM, very much like iframe or SVG. So if you put your link inside object, right, it's going to work just like Charm. The browser is going to do exactly what you want, unless it's, of course, Internet Explorer. For Internet Explorer, and this is probably the worst thing I've ever said in my life, Internet Explorer, you will have to use conditional comments inside object in order to make it work. I told you it's going to be dirty, but it works like charm everywhere. So if you have this problem, just plug the links inside object, no JavaScript needed. Yeah. Or you can just go to this article, has some nice Git illustrations as an alternative, just to calm you down for a while, right? Now, there are some nested techniques, right? You can, if you think about this problem, you can just use position absolute to put the link inside of the link, on top of the link, and then use that index in order to offset. But this is even worse, honestly, and it's not going to be responsive. This is responsive. So, if you resize the window, it's still going to work. But you could use this 4-block link technique as well, which is kind of alternative, right? So here's another one. So how do you make sure that in multi-column table, both a row and the column are highlighted on hover and on tap? This is what you want, right? You want your users to be able to tap on a cell, and you want both the column and the row to be highlighted without JavaScript. Now, everybody's thinking, so how are we going to do it? It's very easy. There is one magical thing in CSS that works like charm all the time. One thing that saves the day every single time. Important? No. No. It could, but it's definitely not here. So of course, we can use pseudo-elements everywhere and pseudo-classes everywhere. So here is a trick, and it's kind of genius in an evil way. So we create tall pseudo-elements, huge pseudo-elements that cover the entire table. We've set it on width 100%. We set it on height like 10,000 pixels or so it covers the entire table. We put overflow hidden on the table, so it actually doesn't, so the actual background is not visible. We then use that index node to put the content up front so we can copy-paste it if we want to. And that's it. That's not a big deal. So the way it actually works is by using pseudo class and pseudo element. And the moment I saw this, I literally freaked out. But it kind of works, right? So again, what you're doing is you're creating this huge element, pseudo element, which has a width of 100% and height 10,000 pixels. Then you position it in the center with top minus 5,000 pixels. Use background color, current color, just because you can. And then you put it back so the content can be copy-pasted, right? Right, I see a lot of excitement here. That's interesting. Right, and of course, you can do the same for th then as well. So you would use th, hover after, and then it actually works like charm as well. And you don't really need JavaScript to make it work. That's pretty cool, I think. All right, not much excitement. That's OK. All right, here's the next one. So we always have problems with tables. Tables are annoying, they're unpredictable, they're spongy, and you don't want to have this all the time. Just really annoying, right? Because you want to have really predictable tables that actually don't take as much space as they want, but actually look nice. Because if you actually just run tests and you just throw some tables in browser with random text in it and random images in it, it's going to look unpredictable, pretty much unpredictable. Unless you're using a fantastic property, which is actually really neglected for some reason, which is table layout fixed. So if you're using table layout, when you're defining the width or the height for the, or depending on your table, for the first column in your th, the rest of the table is going to follow exactly what you defined, what you had defined, if you're using table layout fixed. If you're not, then it's going to look more like this. So you create a table, you put table layout fixed on the table, you define the width for every single th or td at this point in the header, and then the entire table is going to follow this pattern, which is kind of useful, I think. Or maybe just me, I don't know, right? So this is really, really helpful. OK, let me just jump a little bit. Maybe something like this. So this is really, really interesting. So of course, we know what is horrible when it comes to responsive design, when it comes to CSS, when it comes to everything. It's email. How many of you had to send out a responsive email at some point? Who actually genuinely enjoyed it? Not many. Oh, really? Not many people, though, right? The problem is, email clients have really interesting relationship with CSS and media queries specifically, primarily Gmail that doesn't support media queries still. So what if we want Gmail to understand media queries somehow, and actually have the behavior that we intended to have, but we can't use media queries? Is there a better way? Well, when you think about email in general, responsive email specifically, this is how I feel about email. It's like going back in time, like literally going back in time and things used to be, well, different, right? Because this is what most emails still look today. It's unbelievable, right? If you look at the statistics, most emails are still not responsive. Well, of course, you know this stuff. Images are not displayed by default unless it's Gmail. You don't have JavaScript support. You don't have many things. But you still want it to work. Now, there are many creative people in the development community. Very creative, very strange, very crazy. So I had this company that I was working with, and I had a problem that they wanted to display a button, which was not a button for some reason, had to be an image. And it was very important for them that this button would actually look like a button, even if images are not displayed. So they came up with a genius idea of turning bitmap images into tables by converting 1 × 1 pixels in an image into 1 × 1 TD in a table, and sending it out and wrapping it with a link outside of it. And for some mysterious reason, it actually works just like charm in Outlook. This is unbelievable, but it actually does work, right? Or the other thing that you could do if you don't want to go this route, what you could potentially do is just try to play with background color, because you can even color undisplayed images, like just using background color. And this is kind of the technique that many email designers are using, right? Which is kind of, if you find an email designer in a room or developer, just go and hug them, because they have to deal with it all the time. It's very, very sad. And you can use it actually in many different ways. So this is the markup we're going to end up in responsive email a lot of times. But you can still make it responsive if the mail client supports media queries, where you would just use something like display block, table cell, in order to shift elements in your responsive email. But again, what if you can't use media queries? Oh, by the way, this is very interesting, because you have display table, header group, table, footer group, table caption, and other properties like this, which are from good old times and totally outdated and horrible, but they work like charm, and again, in most email clients. So if you want to, for example, change the position of 3 elements, right, you need to look into what's happening in the spec. In the spec, if you're defining a table, you're defining a table header group and footer group. Table header group always lives above the table. Table footer group always live under the table. So you can create a media query which actually just flips elements by defining the entire thing, whatever it is, as display table, the element that's supposed to be on the top as table header group, the element that's supposed to be at the bottom as table footer group, so you don't really need flexbox to reorder things, or floating, because floating in email is another story, right? So this is the world we're living in. But the problem is still media queries. So here's a problem for you. Now, let's say we have this kind of layout. Let's say 4 columns, or maybe it's just to simplify 2 columns. Let's say we have 2 columns on desktop, but want to have 1 column on mobile in Gmail. Now, tell me what's going to happen if we have, let's say, 400 pixels, an actual viewport, but we put these properties on our box. So we set width on 320 pixels, we set min width on 480 pixels, and we set max width on 160 pixels. Who is going to win if we have 400 pixels in width? So who thinks that width is going to win? Who thinks that min width is going to win? Who thinks that max width is going to win? Who really doesn't care at this point anymore? Some people, that's okay, right? This is ridiculous, but it depends. So, I don't know how drunk you have to be in order to figure it out, but if the width value is greater than the max width, then max width wins. Now, that we understand. That makes sense. This is why we're using max width most of the time, right? However, if the min width value is greater than the width, or max width, then min width wins. Now, we have to understand that first, all right? If the min width is greater than the width, or max width, then min width wins. We can abuse it in so many different ways. This is unbelievable. So what can we do? Well, we can put something like this in our CSS, where we define the min width, we define the max width, and we define the width. And we're using calc in order to, kind of as a trigger, to send one layout to smaller views and one layout to larger views, kind of ignoring media queries. Now, this is not the way to avoid media queries, just in general, right? I would prefer to have element media queries instead. But this works in Gmail today. So here's what we want to do. Let's say we want to have a 2-column desktop version. If we have a desktop view, large screen, we want to have 1 column if we have mobile. Now, we are putting this little formula here inside, where 480 pixels is our breakpoint. 100% is going to refer to the width of the parent element, as it always does. Now, our goal is to create a value bigger than our max width or smaller than our min width, so that either one of those properties is applied instead of the width. I see a lot of excitement in the room. It's very exciting. Right, I'm almost finished. Right? So why does it work? Well, if your parent is 500 pixels, we're going to end up with this being 250, max width being 500, width being minus 9,600 pixels. And if we look back, this means that min width is going to win. Small screen, min width is going to win. Well, if we have large screen, min width is going to win. With a small screen, if we have 400 pixels, we have 200 pixels in here, 400 pixels in here, and 38,400 pixels in here, and that means that max width is going to win. And we have exactly that experience that we actually want in Gmail. And it actually works like charm, more or less. Right? This is not my technique. The guy who came up with this is Remy Parmentier, right? But it's really unbelievable that he discovered this. So you can actually use it to make your emails responsive in Gmail today. Now, I have like 100 slides to go through, and I'm not going to make it. So I will actually make the slides available anyway. They already are. I'll just try to find that. Just a moment. The thank you now slide. So
thank you so much, Vitaly.
I have actually 487 slides on this dirty stuff. So it's not like I like dirty or like CSS. Well, actually I do. So please feel free to come to me and talk to me about this if you want to.